I personally have not come across a man who is not aware of the fact of like what's going on, right? I think men feel shamed out of vocalizing how it is that they feel, but like they're very clear on the fact that the moment a woman moves the way a man would, that she's immediately disqualifying herself, right? And the other part of that is like, I think women need to understand, regardless of the fact that you're exercising your options, you cannot do it in a way that a man can because you were not a man, right? There needs to be a level of femininity, of tact, of like responsibility in the way that you move and exercising your option that cannot replicate a man because you're simply not a man. And if you're not interested in an equal partnership, if you're interested in a traditional relationship, you just can't take on that role because you're working against what it is that you actually desire.
That is 100% fact. So not only because you're 100% right, I'm speaking more on the male end as to the way he behaves when he does find out. In that moment, he disqualifies her. You will come back to realize that moment in time, but when it happens, it still hurts, it stings, right? And you're not even aware because it's almost like saying, "You all right, bro? You good? You good? Yeah, I'm good. I'm good with it. I mean, shoot, see who you want to see, but in your head." And this is actually very personal for me because I dated my college girlfriend on and off for 7 years. And when I finally got engaged to somebody else, and this lady went on a trip, and one of her last cry out type of things was, why can't it be me? And I sat there like, when did I actually realize it could never be? And it was that moment where she became arrogant in order to stab me and get me back after something I had done, where she made it known that she was kind of doing what she wanted to do, and she did it with somebody I knew. And she was like, "Well, I'm seeing such and such." And from that day forward, she was like disqualified. We could have sex as much as we want. We can even go out in public. We can go on dates. For that day, I realized that was the day was like, I'm no longer taking you seriously as wife material.
So my disqualifications was I know this is gonna sound really dumb. So I was dating a girl for a long time, and we went to a restaurant, and she was from out of state. So when she popped up, we went to the restaurant. She wasn't expecting me to be there, and the back of my mind was like, I feel like she's not looking directly at me in this conversation. And there was like a group of guys behind me, and I seen, to me, it felt like she might have been looking past me a little bit, like maybe that they was gonna meet up because I wasn't normally gonna be in town that day or whatever. And I cut her off in my head at that day, and then I just looked for another reason to end the relationship after that. And then let me think, what was the other two?
Well, while you think about it, we have two guests who just came up. Welcome to the show. Would you guys like to I think money, I can't see. Is that money?
Money, marriage, and media.
Yes.
Would you like
to you for first, and then we will let is that an R or B? What is
Baron?
Oh, I gotta get my
for real.
She's what you got to add to the conversation?
They don't look good on me, honey.
Stand still, you're bouncing.
Mike, Mike, I cannot stand.
You made Mike forget a comment earlier. I wasn't listening. I heard him. I'm like,
go ahead, money.
Well, a couple of things. The first one is that somebody just mentioned a funnel. I can't remember who it was, but and that's I wanted to mention the fact that that's actually a sociological theory about mate selection. The theory states is that you have potential suitors and you working them out in the funnel and you're disqualifying them based on whatever you want to use. The interesting part of the theory says that when you get down to like the last two, most people end up picking the person that won't leave. Doesn't matter if they're the best person for you or not. We usually pick the person that we think will not leave us in the end. It's both men and women. Interesting concept, right? But the other thing that I wanted to talk about was how does the vetting process affect, the funnel that we're talking about? Because realistically, in most communities, the vetting process is really broken. I mean, most people, we don't even use the tools that we have readily available to us. Both men and women tend to avoid this situation for various reasons. But I think it's interesting that it's like the tools that we have available to us are older individuals in the community or in our family. Usually this, what we're talking about is either the patriarch or the matriarch of the family. For guys, like a good source of vetting, or guys who are marriage minded, a good source of vetting a potential wife would be like either your mom or your grandma who is married. It's like, I don't know, for whatever reason, guys, we don't want to introduce these potential wives to the women in our family as if, they don't have experience being wives themselves. So I don't know, but for women, it's the same thing. It's like, it's supposed to be the patriarch in your family. Like, there are obviously a lot of fatherless homes in our community, but you're going to sit here and tell me that there are no uncles, cousins, or brothers in your family who could help vet the guy? I don't understand that. And then my last point is that the vetting process, there's a big misconception that, I don't know if it's just on YouTube, but we often talk about the vetting process as if it's just a one-time thing, and it's okay, well, that person's vetted, so no, it's supposed to take some time. So my thing is always, well, why are we not inviting these people who are potential mates to the family functions? So ladies, if that potential guy that you don't know if he's actually husband material or not, he should be coming to the family barbecue, so he get a chance to meet your dad and sit down and they can have a conversation.
It's because they know they made a bad choice, bro.
But if you had, okay, but my pushback to that is, if you're not married yet, then is it really a bad choice if you're not sure?
So let me, but before Mike jumps in, because I already know where he's going with this, right? I wanna preemptively jump in, right? As a woman who's not married yet, who does have a patriarch in the family, who does have a father in the household, who does grew up in a 2-parent household, I want to address that directly, right? There's a two-pronged thing to your question. One is that the father's interest, or the patriarch's interest, may not necessarily align with the person who's intending on getting married's interests. There's a disalignment, whether it's generational, whether it's cross-cultural, whether it's whatever, right? And I say that as somebody who's a first-generation immigrant. My values growing up in a society that don't necessarily align with the values that I was raised with in the home, there is a little bit of conflict. And so there is a time period where I want to vet this person out for myself to see if we interact interpersonally, like one-to-one, right? Like, this man specifically with me as a woman specifically, are we able to make this function before I introduce him to my father, to align with the grander scale of values that I've been raised with? That's one part of it. The other part of it, right, is, I think, to what Trigger Mike was saying, is that there's this fear of this person doesn't line up. And I will, on the internet, on the whole public worldwide internet, will admit to this, right? That I have been in situations where I have coached my partner on how they will pass that test with my father. These are the questions that he's going to ask. These are the answers that you need to be able to be prepared for, right? These are the things that he's looking for in the answers when he's asking you questions, right? There's a certain situation where there's people from a certain class, a certain socioeconomic level, a certain upbringing, a certain region, a certain religion that you grew up in, whatever the metrics are, right? There's a difference between the decision maker and the person who's involved in the marriage directly, where there's a little bit of disconnect. where you're preparing the person, but you don't know if they'll still like heed your counsel and being able to like pass that vetting process, right? So I think that's the part where like people don't necessarily factor in terms of like, is this really going to work? Because if you're having somebody coach you through the process, you're going to pass with flying colors, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're the right person for the job, because you've had that coaching on how to pass that interview. It's similar to like a mentor who's coaching you through like a career path. If they're able to let you know what it is that a person who's like at the next stage is looking for, and they're able to give you the right answers, but aren't necessarily invested in like your personal progression of like your readiness for that position. Some people might push you before you're actually ready to go there. Marriage really isn't that different, where like people will like prep you for things that you're not necessarily ready for, if that makes sense.